I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, a religious debacle in the state of Israel. A compromise solution regarding non-Orthodox prayer at the Western Wall, which took painstaking years to accomplish and was finally agreed to a year and a half ago in January of 2016 under the stewardship of Natan Sharansky, head of the Jewish Agency. That compromise has imploded into what feels like a million pieces. The Israeli cabinet voted to cease all implementation of the compromise plan, which included three essential aspects. One, the building of a beautiful plaza at another section of the Western Wall known as Robinson's Arch, which would be the place where women and mixed couples could engage in prayer and read the Torah as one would in any non-Orthodox synagogue. Two, this section of the wall at Robinson's Arch would be entered through the main Western Wall area, which everyone is familiar with now, so there would be no separate or second-class entrance to the wall at Robinson's Arch, but it would have the same status as the current section of the wall. And third, this new section of the wall would be under a joint administration of both Orthodox and non-Orthodox rabbis. These are the three essentials of the compromise solution the Knesset agreed to implement in January of last year. But on Sunday, June 25th, under extreme pressure from the ultra-Orthodox parties that sustain the current coalition government of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli cabinet put everything on hold. As you can imagine, the reaction of non-Orthodox Jewish world has been deafening. Everyone is furious. As it also so happens, the Jewish Agency is holding its Board of Governors meeting in Jerusalem this week. Most of world Jewry's leadership, most of American Jewry's leadership is in Jerusalem this week. A gala evening was scheduled for tonight, Tuesday night, hosting Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The Jewish Agency has withdrawn its invitation to the Prime Minister. Rabbi Rick Jacobs, president of the Reform Movement's congregational arm, the URJ, the Union for Reform Judaism, canceled the scheduled meeting with the Prime Minister and called the decision unconscionable and an insult to the majority of world Jewry. David Harris, executive director of the AJC, the American Jewish Committee, described the cabinet decision as a setback for Jewish unity and the essential ties that bind Israel and American Jewry. Jerry Silverman, president and CEO of the Jewish Federations of North America, also expressed his deep disappointment, but Silverman agreed to meet with the Prime Minister to communicate the feelings of the vast majority of American Jews. Anat Hoffman, who's been a fierce advocate of women of the wall and the right of women and non-Orthodox Jews to have an equal place at the wall, called this cabinet decision shameful and blamed the cabinet for being subservient to a handful of religious extremists. And then, of course, Natan Sharansky, who'd worked so hard for this compromise, described it as a setback for Jewish unity and the essential ties that bind Israel and American Jews, the two largest centers of Jewish life in the world. And the Jewish Agency placed advertisements in major Israeli newspapers saying that the Israeli government's reversal on the Kotel Compromise endangers the unity of the Jewish people. Even our viewers have weighed in. In a poignant email, one viewer wrote, "Things aren't bad enough with J Street dividing Jews, the campus BDS problem having devastating effects on the next generation, the myriad of organizations slamming Israel as an apartheid state. But now Israel hands a silver platter to all the critics of Israel. Nothing will now drown out the horrendous bad PR Israel will get from this, not to mention alienating young people. And then he writes me, please do something, Rabbi. Well, here at JBS, all we can do is inform you, our viewers, of what is a most disappointing and disillusioning cabinet decision. My own perspective on this issue, and I stress this is only my own, is that no decision made by the Knesset should ever be seen by world Jewry as a reason to distance oneself from the state of Israel, or to do any less to support the Jewish state, which really is the Israeli people. Israel is family. And if the system in Israel doesn't work as we'd like it to, as many Israelis would like it to, that should have nothing to do with our commitment to the state of Israel and the Jewish people who live in Israel. I personally feel not one whit further from Israel because of this decision than I did before the decision. But it is very disappointing and disillusioning for a compromise solution to be suddenly overturned and for Israel to take a serious step backward in terms of embracing all expressions of Torah and of Judaism. I don't love Israel any less. I'm not alienated in any way. But I feel the cabinet made a serious political mistake and in some way is betraying the Israeli people by abrogating an agreement which was embracing of all the people of Israel and of all world Jewry as a whole. And I'm so glad many of our Jewish leaders are in Jerusalem right now to convey their disappointment as well. But one national Jewish leader is not in Israel today. He was instrumental in helping to forge the compromise. He is the chief executive officer of the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, Rabbi Steven Wernick. And Steve joins us now on our JBS phones from Los Angeles. Steve, thank you for giving us a moment here on JBS.
You're welcome.
Steve, first of all, were you surprised by the cabinet decision?
I think everybody was surprised. The issue, though it had been rumored for a while, was not originally on the agenda of the cabinet meeting. In fact, it didn't appear until about 30 minutes before the meeting began. Natan Sharansky was at that cabinet meeting, as was Stuart Eisenstadt, who's the chair of the Jewish People Policy Institute. They had just presented a report to the cabinet about the growing divide between North American diaspora Jewry and Israeli Jewry. And they had specifically even mentioned that the continued delay in implementing the Kotel agreement that was concluded 18 months ago was adding to that divide, and that the government should do everything in its possible to implement as soon as possible. And then, obviously, the entire tone of the meeting changed as this agenda item came up, and the cabinet voted to permanently freeze the implementation, which is essentially killing it, because for the last 18 months it was frozen already. And so the decision, essentially, for all practical purposes, was a capitulation to the ultra-Orthodox parties.
Mm-hmm. Have you heard how the cabinet has justified their decision? It's one thing for you and for me to suggest that it was buckling to Orthodox pressure. We believe it was. But I can't believe that's how the cabinet expressed it. Have you heard anything about how the cabinet has justified their decision?
What I've heard has really been that the cabinet, that the prime minister basically felt that if he did not give in to the demands of the ultra-Orthodox, which was to freeze the implementation and to kill it, and their concern, their complaint rather, is over two essential elements of the agreement, which is a shared entryway. And Mark, you misspoke a little bit. It's not a pluralistic religious oversight committee. It was actually an oversight committee of the government, of the Prime Minister's office, for which representation on that committee would be from the streams and from Women of the Wall, as well as at-large government appointees, the chair of the Jewish Agency, and a representative from the Archaeological Society. But the Haredi objected to those two elements because they represented tacit recognition of the state of the streams. Mm-hmm. And they basically, they really did say to the government, you either freeze this and stop it. They're worried about the upcoming decision of Bagatz of the Israeli Supreme Court, or they were going to bring down a coalition. And the Prime Minister has actually been very clear that he was not going to risk the coalition over this. So it actually is a capitulation to the extreme elements of Israeli religious society. And whatever the government has been trying to soften that with in the last day or so is doesn't change the facts.
By the way, would you have wanted the government to fall because of this issue?
It's not for me to answer that question. I wanted the government, the same government, to implement its own agreements. Right? This whole process began almost 5 years ago when the Prime Minister asked Natan Sharansky to bring the parties together and create a compromise solution. We worked together with the government for almost 4 years to do so, and we achieved that compromise.
Yes.
That regulation was passed by this government by a vote of 15-5 18 months ago. What I expect is the government to honor its own agreements. And what we have here is the government now backtracking on its own agreements and on the very specific public promises that the Prime Minister made not only to the Israeli people, but to worldwide Jewry, not once, but on numerous occasions.
Absolutely.
That's what I expect.
See, my problem is that you and I see it very similarly. I don't know, however, whether there isn't a political reality in the state of Israel that we also must be sensitive to. I was surprised that you didn't say, yes, the government should fall. Oh, if the government made this promise and it doesn't keep the promise, Netanyahu has to form a new government. I expected you to say that. It seems to me that if you and I were in the political circle in Israel, that's the choice we would have, and that we, who are American Jews committed to Jewish pluralism, we have to be willing to say one of two things. Either the politics of Israel are what they are, and until they're changed, this is going to happen time and time again, or we have to say, Mr. Netanyahu, this is an issue. You should have permitted the government to fall before capitulating.
I think that if Netanyahu had implemented the agreement immediately after it was it passed the government, it'd be in a different circumstance. In the intervening months, the Israeli political reality has changed, and obviously, therefore, his calculation about maintaining the government coalition has changed as well. So I'm sensitive to the fact that I'm part of a diaspora community that is deeply engaged with Israel, and has the opportunity to speak through the Jewish Agency and then directly with the highest echelons of Israeli leadership. But I don't think it's for me to say whether or not the government should or should not fall. I think for me it's very simple, is that this was Netanyahu's process. This was Netanyahu's promise. This was Netanyahu's original success and result by bringing it to the government in January of 2016, as he did. And now it's also Netanyahu's failure. And we're going to pay attention to that and remember that. Mm-hmm. I don't know yet, what that means in practical terms.
Yes.
But I think that what you've seen through the unprecedented actions of diaspora Jewry through the Jewish Agency, the cancellation of meetings and a gala, of the complete rewriting of the agenda of the Board of Governors meetings, that Natan Sharansky, who is a close ally of the Prime Minister, being as critical as he has been over the last couple of days, I think we're witnessing a watershed moment in the relationship between the diaspora and certainly the government of Israel.
But
look, I'm a Zionist, as you are. I am not going to disengage from Israel as a result of this. What I am likely to do is probably more engage and increase that engagement and work harder for the elements of Israeli society that I think pose an existential threat to Judaism worldwide and to the soul of the state of Israel in particular, and that is the increasing radical influence of the ultra-religious within the Jewish state. Mm-hmm. And I think that if that goes unanswered by Israelis and by the diaspora community, it's not even, for me, it's not even just a potential threat of a greater distancing between the next generation of North American Jews and the state of Israel. I think that it portends very poorly for Israel itself as both the Jewish state and a democratic state, and that the Rabbanut and the ultra-religious parties are actually creating an existential threat to Israeli democracy.
How so?
By a stranglehold on issues of personal status. The Kotel is symbolic of the larger issues within Israel as it relates to conversion, which is also on the agenda today.
Yes.
As it relates to marriage, the fact that 30% of every wedding that takes place annually involving an Israeli takes place chutz la'aretz, outside of the land of Israel, should be a sign for everyone who's concerned. Mm-hmm. When you have 30% of your population that feels that they want to get married outside of the state because they don't want to deal with the Rabbanut, that's a problem. It's marriage, it's conversion, it's burial, it's adoption, it's divorce. Quite frankly, it's even kashrut. With hotels worried that if they allow for pluralistic prayer within the hotels, they might lose their kashrut certificate. The religious parties are afraid. They're afraid that that as modernity is happening all around them, they're going to lose power, and so they're trying to consolidate that power. And in so doing, they're actually causing great harm to Israel and to the Jewish people.
Mm-hmm. Steve, do you think that the Israeli people themselves will have the kind of reaction that you're expressing? And when I come on and say it's both disappointing and disillusioning, do you think enough Israelis are going to feel what you feel?
I don't think that that Israelis are as concerned about the Kotel as North American diaspora Jews are, and that's because by living in Israel, many of them have already ceded the Kotel to the ultra-Orthodox. I think Israelis are more concerned about the other issues that I mentioned. They're more concerned about marriage, divorce, conversion, burial, adoption, and so forth. And I think that what we have to use this moment as an opportunity for is to educate Israelis how they're all connected, and how Israelis, need to increase their engagement on these issues, because they do affect them, and not just North American Jewry.
Absolutely.
And they do have an impact on the future nature of the Jewish and democratic state. And so I was really pleased to see the Jewish Agency take out those full-page ads and publish them in 6 major newspapers. That's the first time we've done something like that. And I think we need to do more to raise the awareness of the Israeli population about these issues, and to create stronger coalitions with Israelis around these issues in order to bring about real change.
You know, Steve, I would love Israel to be as pluralistic a Jewish community as America is pluralistic. And my only feeling has been that while I want American Jewry and really world Jewry to explain that and to try to influence that in the state of Israel, I've always believed ultimately it has to come out of the Israeli people. That unless the Israeli people feel as, as betrayed, and you have every right to be betrayed. You could feel betrayed, Stephen. Everybody watching right now should understand. You gave a lot of hours and times and energy and thought and heart to helping to forge this compromise. And it's not personally directed at you, but you have a right to feel personally that you have been betrayed as well. Until we feel that the Israeli people experience the same kind of sense of betrayal, not on the wall, I agree with you, Steve, but on the other issues you mentioned, that when it comes to marriage, divorce, burial, conversion, and conversion was a major issue also addressed in this last cabinet meeting. But until Israelis are really outraged, Steve, the fact that you and I and, Rick Jacobs and Julie Schoenfeld and Jerry Silverman and David Harris, the fact that we feel disappointed, that's not going to change it. And my question for you is, you have a real feel here for where the state of Israel is, and I'm now talking about the people of Israel. To what extent do you feel there will be in Israel, in the next, let's say, 3, 4, 5 years, a wellspring of sentiment that will have political repercussions, so that the next Knesset, the next coalition government, can't be one that is held hostage by a small number of ultra-Orthodox Knesset members? What do you expect to happen, Steve, in the next 3, 4, 5 years?
Well, I was very pleased to see that Yair Lapid, the head of Yesh Atid, I think it was several months ago, I don't remember exactly, but when they published their new platform by which they intend to run the next Knesset elections when they come about, very specifically, one of the 7 platform pieces was about religious pluralism within the state of Israel. And I was also pleased to see that Yair Lapid almost immediately, sitting next to my colleagues, Rabbi Julie Schoenfeld, who's the executive director of the Rabbinical Assembly of Conservative Rabbis, and Rabbi Rick Jacobs, who is the president and CEO of the Reform Movement, very clearly came out with a strong statement of disappointment and upsetness, and an olive branch to engage with him and with others like him to bring about this kind of change. We also saw from Tzipi Livni and Bougie Herzog from the Zionist Union Party very strong condemnations of the government as well. And so I think that, it's upon us who care about these issues to work with those politicians and parties for whom this would be a priority, and to engage deeper in Israeli society in order to make sure that this issue becomes a more prominent agenda item in the next Knesset. So I'm hopeful that opportunity exists. I would also say, that there's a hint of a premise in your question that I wholly disagree with, and that's the notion that yes, it's true that all politics are local, and that there's not going to be real change until the Israeli electorate demands it. But at the same time, the U.S. community in particular is constantly asked to advocate for Israel within the U.S. political system in order to assure Israel's existential and security requirements, as well as Israel's place in the world. We're the community that is fighting BDS on campus. We're the community that was greatly divided when the Prime Minister asked us to go against the U.S. President with regard to the Iran deal. We're the community that flies into Washington on a monthly basis to advocate amongst the U.S. administration and Congress in order to maintain that strategic bipartisan alliance and so forth. And so Israel can't have it both ways. It can't depend upon the North American community to engage with it, and then renege on its deals that would provide recognition for that same community. And so what's happening today is that as the world continues to develop and to progress, Israel is on the one hand trying to pull us closer in order to meet its needs, but at the same time, the current government of Israel is delegitimizing the very same people that are fighting for its legitimization. And more and more North Americans and diaspora Jews are realizing this, and it creates a very unstable circumstance for the relationship and the support of the Jewish state. It'd be one thing if Netanyahu never agreed to this. Then it would be like we'll still fight and so forth. But he agreed to it.
I understand.
He exerted lots of resources, and his government passed it.
Yes.
And so now he's capitulating to a new political circumstance, and in the process, he's doing great harm to diaspora Israeli relations.
All right, look, I wish I had an hour with you, and at some point, you and I should be in studio together. I would love to discuss this further. You are correct. You have identified an area where you and I see this very, very differently. When I go to Washington, it's not because I am for or against a specific policy or action of an Israeli government. I'm going to Washington because I support the state of Israel, period. And the state of Israel needs American existential, military, and financial and intelligence support, regardless of who the prime minister is and what very bad, destructive decisions may be made by any specific government. So yes, you and I see that part differently, but I want you to know I have enormous regard for who you are and what you've done, the contribution you've made, not simply to the state of Israel, but to world Jewry. And it is so kind of you to give me a few moments here on JBS. At some point, I've got to get you in the studio where we have more time together. But I thank you very, very much, Steve.
Thank you, Mark, and I look forward to that future time together.
You be well. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
We only have a moment for me to thank everybody involved in the news, Sloan Copeland, our director, John McDevitt, editor, and to our producer, as always, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.